The second day of spring brought Clara down a lonely trail where the wind scraped dust across the fence line. She rode slow, her old pony limping with age and her bow hanging across her back, more memory than weapon. For years, people had called her strange, whispered that she was cursed or simply forgotten. She had long stopped caring. The hills west of San Saba were enough for her, quiet, distant, with no eyes to watch her. But that morning the quiet broke. At first she thought it was another ragged scarecrow leaning crooked against the posts. Then she saw the raw edges of barbed wire biting into human skin. A boy, barely a man, no shoes, no name on his lips, hung there like a broken effigy. His arms stretched behind him, his face crusted with dried blood. His chest rose only slightly, but it rose. The coyotes hadn't touched him yet, though buzzards circled low, their wings blackening the sky above. Three already sat bold on the rail waiting. Clara slid from her saddle before she could think better. She was not in the habit of stopping for strangers, least of all white boys, who looked left for dead on some rancher's claim. Yet something in the way his eyes cracked open, unfocused and resigned, struck her deeper than she wanted to admit. She loosened the wire with practiced fingers, careful not to tear him further, swift enough to keep the buzzards wary. He did not flinch, only sagged into her hands. She cupped the back of his head, tipped water against his split lips. He stirred mouth, moving without strength. No sound came, so she answered for him, voice low, first in Comanche, then in English. "You're not dead. That means you're still meant for something." Clara had not meant to stop for him. She had not meant to stop for anyone in years. 27 winters had passed since the night her world burned, since soldiers and dogs had torn through the camp and left her with nothing but the sound of her sisters' bodies hitting the frozen earth. She had run barefoot, bleeding, until the hills gave her cover. From then on, she lived like a shadow, trading hides for cornmeal once a month, speaking to no one, keeping her fire low so it would not give her away. People in town called her a witch, or worse, a ghost waiting to die. They were not entirely wrong. She had stopped expecting to save or be saved. But now here was this boy, trussed like livestock and left to rot. She could not walk away. She carried him slung over her shoulder like firewood, step by step, back to the small hut she had built near a creek where the water always ran cold. Inside, she stoked a fire until the smoke clung to the rafters. She boiled herbs in a clay pot, yarrow for bleeding, sage for cleansing, and stripped his shirt away. What she found beneath the blood made her still. His skin was a map of suffering, raised welts from belts, long cuts from whips, deep bruises that told of shackles too tight for too long. This was not the body of someone merely punished. It was the body of someone trained to endure pain, as though endurance itself was demanded of him. She cleaned him slowly, pouring river water over his chest, wiping away dirt and blood with the soft inner bark of cottonwood. When he shivered, she covered him with deer hide. When he vomited up the broth she had spooned between his lips, she held his head steady and said nothing. When he whimpered in dreams, she let the fire answer instead of words. By the third night, his breathing steadied, though his body still sagged with exhaustion. Just before dawn, he stirred, eyes half open, fixed on the smoke curling above him. His voice rasped like dry grass. "Am I dead?" Clara didn't answer right away. She poured water into a carved bowl, lifted it to his mouth. He drank, coughed, then blinked at her, dazed. "Why did you help me?" he managed. She studied him for a long time, this boy with blood still on his face and resignation still in his gaze. Then she said in English, so he could not mistake her, "Because you look like you didn't care if I did or not." The words struck him harder than the water in his throat. His lips trembled, but no denial came. Instead, after a long silence, he whispered, "Why did they leave me?" Clara did not answer. She knew already the scars told the story. The emptiness in his eyes filled in the rest. To name it aloud would only cut deeper into flesh not yet healed. So she kept her silence, let the fire pop, and the wind rattle the roof while the boy drifted back to uneasy sleep. She had not saved him because he was hers to save. She had saved him because she knew what it was to be abandoned and what it cost to decide to live anyway. By the fifth morning, Thomas tried to rise on his own. His legs trembled beneath him, buckling before he could take 2 steps. He cursed under his breath, teeth clenched against the pain. Clara watched from her stool by the fire, her tone calm but edged with certainty. "Stop proving you are weak by rushing," she said. He looked up, startled. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not with scorn, but with the kind of authority that expected him to listen. He wanted to argue, but his body betrayed him, collapsing back onto the deer hide. The shame burned hotter than his fever. "I'm not weak," he muttered. Clara's gaze was steady. "Then wait. Strength listens before it moves." The words silenced him more than any rebuke could have. He had been told his whole life what he wasn't: obedient enough, white enough, quiet enough, but never that his spirit might still be listening. Later, as dusk painted the hut in amber, he spoke again, voice low and raw. "I don't have a name." She tilted her head, curious. "Everyone had one once, not me. My folks just called me boy. Ranchers called me half-breed. My master." His voice trailed heavy with memories too sharp to touch. He looked away, ashamed. Clara did not press. After a long pause, she said, "You were born. You bled. You're still alive. That means you deserve a name." His eyes flicked toward her, searching. "You gonna give me one?" She shook her head. "No, but when you've earned it, I'll tell you the moment I hear it." For the first time, Thomas almost believed he might. The knock wasn't a knock at all. It was 3 sharp crashes of a boot against the hut door, the kind of sound that carried threat more than greeting. Thomas stiffened, every muscle remembering. Clara rose slowly, her braids hanging loose against her shoulders. She didn't hurry. She didn't flinch. Outside stood 2 men. One remained in the saddle, a double-barreled shotgun resting easy across his lap. The other, a red-bearded man with boots too polished for ranch work, spat into the dirt and smirked. "You're her?" he asked. Clara gave him nothing, no answer, no nod. He jerked his chin toward the hut. "That boy inside, he's not yours." "I never said he was," she replied evenly. "Well, he ain't anybody's anymore. That's what the wire was for. Should have left him for the buzzards." The man on horseback chuckled darkly. "You took in a rabid dog Comanche." Clara's eyes didn't shift. "I've seen rabid dogs. They foam and bite." He only breathes. The bearded man stepped closer, voice roughening. "He stole from us horse liquor trouble. He was broken. We broke him. Should have killed him clean." He lifted his gun just enough to change the air between them. Inside, Thomas pressed his back to the door, fist tight. His body shook, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something deeper, rage and purpose, tangled together. Clara's voice stayed calm. "No one owns him now. He's not yours to keep. He was never yours to break." The man sneered. "Lady, this ain't no tribal campfire. This is Texas. Harboring a thief means you hang with him." Before Clara could answer, a new voice cut through the tension, raw but steady. "If you touch her, I'll gut you where you stand." The men turned. Thomas stood in the doorway, legs unsteady, hands gripping Clara's old blade with more will than skill. His eyes blazed not with fear, but with defiance. "You think I don't remember the nights you tied me out back like an animal?" he spat at the red-bearded man. "You think I don't remember your boots on my ribs?" The man shifted, his white lips curling in disdain, but Clara lifted her hand, her tone iron. "Try it, please." The moment stretched taut. The rider shifted nervously in the saddle. The red-bearded man spat again, masking hesitation with bravado. "Keep him. We'll say the coyotes took him." With that, they turned their horses and rode off, not in defeat exactly, but with the knowledge that they hadn't won. Not this time. As their figures disappeared beyond the ridge, Thomas dropped the blade. His chest heaved as if the world itself had been pressing down on him. He collapsed against the frame of the door. Clara knelt beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. "You were ready to fight them," she said softly. "You would have died." He nodded, sweat dripping into his eyes. "Yes, and you let me." Her gaze held his. "Because you didn't need me to save you. You needed to decide you were worth saving." The words sank into him like water into parched earth. For the first time, Thomas understood. Freedom wasn't something someone else granted. It was something he had to claim for himself. Thomas's body healed slowly, but each sunrise brought a new layer of strength. At first, his steps were clumsy, and his hands shook when he tried to hold a bow. But Clara never mocked him. She handed him snares and showed how to set them near rabbit trails, patient as he fumbled with knots. By the second week, he could draw water without stumbling, and even brought back a fish, small, crooked, but caught with his own hand. Each evening, they sat near the fire. Thomas asked endless questions about the land, the birds, why she shaped the fire pit in circles. Clara often answered with few words, but those words carried weight. Listen before you believe, she told him one morning. He grinned for the first time since she'd cut him from the fence. It wasn't the grin of a boy nor of someone proud. It was simply human. One night as smoke from the fire drifted upward, Thomas asked a question that had been clawing at him. What do Comanche call someone who doesn't belong anywhere? Clara stirred the stew and replied, we don't. Even ghosts belong to someone. The answer struck him like a stone tossed into still water, rippling out in ways he couldn't yet name. For the first time in his life, he wondered if belonging wasn't something given, but something claimed. Days passed with quiet rhythm. Then at sunset, Clara noticed smoke on the ridge, sharp, deliberate puffs that no accident could make. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't Comanche or Apache. It was military, U.S. cavalry. They were hunting someone, likely him. The next morning, she handed Thomas a bundle of sage. Go to the river bend. Check the traps again. We checked yesterday, he protested. Check again. If you see men in uniform, burn this. Her eyes told him more than her words. He nodded and left. By midday, the riders came 7 men in dust-stained blue coats. They carried themselves with the authority of law, which to Clara looked no different from the arrogance of wolves. The officer dismounted, tall and thin-faced with a pale mustache. Afternoon, he said. We're looking for an escaped prisoner. Young, white, mixed blood. Dangerous. Attacked a rancher. Stole a horse. Possibly unstable. Clara crossed her arms. Name. The officer shifted. No legal name. Might go by Jesse or Eli. Or nothing at all. Her gaze was flint. Lots of boys in the world without names. Not like this one, the officer pressed. He's a threat to you. To the law. Clara's voice cut clean. Law has sharp teeth when it's afraid. The officer stepped closer, hand resting on his pistol. This boy killed a man, shot a corporal. Clara's eyes did not waver. Before or after you tied him to a fence that stopped him. For the first time, the man's mask cracked. He glanced at his men, then back to her. You're harboring a criminal. No, Clara said firmly. I'm protecting a boy left for the buzzards who now feeds himself and asks good questions. He's not your people. He is now. The words hung heavy. The cavalry did not attack, not yet. They withdrew to the ridge-setting camp, within sight, waiting like hawks. For 2 days, their campfires burned. But Thomas never returned to the hut. Clara had trained him well. He slept under pine branches, moved through the brush like a shadow. He watched, waited, and learned. On the 3rd night, Thomas acted. He crawled low across the ridge, silent as a fox. In his hand was crushed yarrow Clara had given him. The soldiers slept, their snores rising and falling like the tide. He sprinkled the powder into their coffee satchel and slipped back into the dark. By morning, they drank without suspicion. By noon, their bellies cramped, their faces pale. Some doubled over behind trees. Others groaned in the grass. They were soldiers of the United States, but no match for the quiet cunning of a boy who had once been broken and left to die. Thomas returned to Clara's side at the hut. She was already standing with her bow slung over her shoulder, eyes on the horizon. It's time to leave, she said. He did not argue. They packed lightly herbs, hides, the blade Thomas had once held against his masters, and little else. Together they rode east past the hills and beyond the ridge where soldiers had camped. They did not speak much, but in the silence, Thomas felt something new, resolve, not fear. He had not just survived, he had acted, he had chosen. That night by their fire, Thomas stared into the flames. I would have gone back for you, he said quietly. Clara stirred the embers. I know, they would have killed you. Maybe, but it wouldn't have mattered. She turned her gaze to him, the firelight reflected in her dark eyes. You didn't need me to save you. You needed to prove to yourself you were worth saving. Thomas let the words sink into him, heavy and true. For the first time since he could remember, he didn't feel like prey or property. He felt like a person, not yet named, not yet whole, but no longer lost. Behind them, the cavalry would eventually rise, sick but alive, uncertain whether to pursue. Ahead of them lay nothing certain, only the red earth and the possibility of something new. Clara and Thomas moved on anyway. They had left the place where he had nearly died, and with it the last claim anyone else had on his life. They left behind the cabin and the ridge where the cavalry had camped, moving eastward under a pale moon. The land opened wide, scarred with red stone and quiet gullies, and Clara guided their steps to a place where the cottonwoods bent low over a creek. Here, she said simply, and Thomas nodded, though he still thought of himself as a guest in a world she carried with her. Together they built something new. With branches of cottonwood lashed by rawhide and hides stretched tight, they raised a lean-to against the wind. Thomas chopped the poles without waiting to be told, sweat running down his temples, determination in his jaw. Clara stitched the seams with silent precision, her hands moving with the rhythm of someone who had survived too many seasons alone. At night they sat by the fire, no longer strangers, but not yet family. It was during one of those nights that Thomas finally let words slip past his guarded lips. He had been watching the embers, his hands cupped, as if holding something fragile, when he said, "I found a turtle today by the creek. It was upside down, the shell cracked. I thought it was finished, but I flipped it back." Clara studied him, her face unreadable in the shifting light. He swallowed. I think maybe I've been waiting for someone to flip me back over too. Someone to prove I wasn't just meant to die on a fence." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she set a stick into the flames and murmured, "Then you're not the only one." From that night on, their silences felt different, less like distance, more like a language of their own. As spring grew deeper, Clara decided the boy was ready for a kind of test. She reached into her bundle one evening and unwrapped a small necklace, its beads dull with age, but strung in colors of dusk and riverstone. Her voice softened as she held it out. "I made this for my brother before the raids. He never came back." Thomas shook his head, backing slightly. "I can't take that. It's not mine." "You're not taking it," Clara corrected. "You're wearing it. Until you know your name." His breath caught in his throat. Carefully, with fingers that still trembled on cold nights, he tied the necklace around his neck. "What did you call him?" he asked. "Sadiq," Clara answered. "It means one who listens before speaking." Thomas touched the beads gently, as if afraid they might vanish. "Seems like a good thing to be." Clara only looked at him a long while. In her eyes was neither pity nor possession, only a recognition that made him straighten his back. The days became harder, not because of hunger, but because Thomas refused to remain idle. He trapped rabbits, learned to clean fish without gagging, and even carved small tools from cedar with a steadying hand. Clara never praised him outright. She knew too much pride could breed carelessness, but her silence carried its own approval, and he felt it. Then came the hunt. One dawn, Thomas slipped into the brush with the bow Clara had left leaning against the hut wall. The sun was still hidden, and mist laced the grass silver. He moved quietly, remembering Clara's lessons about the wind, the way to step with toes first. Hours passed before he saw the deer, small but strong, grazing at the edge of a clearing. He drew the bow, heart hammering, and let the arrow fly. The shot was clean truer than he had expected. The deer fell. Thomas carried it back, dragging the weight with muscles that burned but did not falter. When he laid it at Clara's feet, he looked up at her, breathless, waiting. She knelt, ran her hand along the fur, studied the wound, then looked at him. "That wasn't luck," she said. He blinked. "It wasn't?" "No," Clara said. "That was earned." That evening, as the firelight painted the hut in shades of amber and shadow, Clara disappeared inside and returned holding a scrap of old hide. Dark, worn with symbols stitched in deep red thread, it looked both fragile and enduring. She placed it in his hands. He stared down. "What is it, your name?" she said. His throat tightened. "You said you'd tell me when I earned it." "I did." He traced the stitching with a trembling thumb. "So, what is it?" Clara lifted her chin, her voice steady. "It says Noah. It means he who chooses where he belongs." For a long time he only stared, lips parting, but no sound emerging. Then he whispered it aloud, as though testing the shape of freedom on his tongue. "Noah." This time when he smiled, it was not with the nervousness of a boy unsure of his worth, nor the pride of someone desperate for approval. It was quiet, whole, a smile of belonging. Clara said nothing more. She didn't need to. The fire cracked between them, and the night wind carried away the last echoes of the boy who had once been tied to a fence. In his place sat Noah, a young man who had earned not just a name, but the right to claim his life. And for the first time in years, Clara felt that she too had gained something. Someone who chose to stay someone who, like her, had decided that survival was no longer enough. They were living now, and living meant naming, choosing, belonging. Years stretched into seasons and seasons into years. The boy who once lay broken against a fence no longer looked like a boy. Noah grew into his body the way trees grow into stone crevices, strong, steady, unyielding. His shoulders widened, his voice deepened, and his movements carried the quiet confidence of someone who had learned both hardship and grace. Wherever he went, he left a sign carved into bark, a circle with a line through it. On cottonwoods, by rivers, on cedars, along ridges, on the smooth trunks of aspens, high in the hills, each mark carried the same message: someone lived here who refused to die in silence. For Noah, it was more than a mark. It was a declaration that he had claimed a place in the world, even if only for a moment, and that his story would not be erased. It was by such a marked grove while fishing with a hand-carved spear that he met Kaya. She was gathering berries in a worn basket, her hair tangled, her laugh sharp as creek water. Where he was measured and quiet, she was restless and curious, teasing him about his solemn face, then returning the next day with more questions. Noah, who had once thought he would walk the earth alone, found himself listening more than speaking, and then speaking more than he realized. Kaya began to linger, and before long she chose to follow him back to the cedar grove. Clara, sitting by the fire one evening, watched the two young people laugh over the smoke of roasting fish. She did not interfere. She only smiled, a small, quiet curve of her lips, as if a weight she had carried for decades had finally lightened. But time does not linger for the living. Clara's hair, once black as raven feathers, had long turned white. Her steps slowed, her voice grew softer, but her presence remained sharp like the last strokes on a nearly finished painting. Noah watched her more carefully in those days, fetching wood, without being asked, tending snares so she could rest. Kaya too began to care for her weaving mats and preparing herbs, the way Clara had once done for Noah. Still, Clara never complained, never asked. She had lived her life with silence, and now she prepared to leave it the same way. One evening, as the fire glowed orange against the hide walls, Clara called Noah to her side. Her hand, once strong and sure, trembled slightly as she reached for his. "I'm ready to go," she whispered. He swallowed hard. Where her smile was faint, fragile, but it reached her eyes. To wherever the buffalo go when they're no longer hunted. Tears blurred his vision. "Ta," he began, but she lifted her hand weakly to stop him. "Don't name it," she said. "Just hold my hand. That's enough." So he did. All through the night, he kept her hand in his, listening to her breaths grow lighter, more uneven, until they stopped altogether. The fire burned low, and dawn spilled pale light into the lodge. When he finally kissed her forehead, she no longer breathed, but her fingers were still faintly warm. They buried her beneath a cliff of red rock, where the canyon sang with wind each morning, and the tall grasses swayed like a river. Noah carved a simple stone to mark the place. It bore no mention of Comanche or woman or mother. It read only, "She gave me back to myself." Noah stood before it with Kaya's hand in his, the necklace Clara had once given him resting against his chest. He understood now that family was not written in blood, but in choices, hers to save him, his to stay theirs, to belong to one another. And with that, Clara's story ended, but her gift endured. She had taken a boy with no name and given the world back a man who knew exactly who he was. Years passed, and Clara's grave beneath the red cliffs grew wild with tall grass and wildflowers. But the story of the woman who saved a nameless boy lived on, not in books or ledgers, but in the quiet work of the man she left behind. Travelers whispered of him, a half-wild man in the forests, tall and steady, who helped mend broken wagons, soothed sick animals, and guided lost children back to their mothers. Some said he was a ghost. Others called him strange. But those who had sat by his fire, tasted his stew, or heard the low hum of his voice, knew the truth. He was Noah, the boy who once had no name, now the man who gave others back to themselves. And in the hush of the trees, when the wind moved just right, it almost sounded like Clara's voice whispering through the leaves, "He belongs."